Hey, hey everyone, it's Naomi Wolf, and back by popular demand, which I really wasn't sure would happen. I feel very humble and grateful for, is many people have asked me to resume the readings of the Geneva Bible, the 1560 Geneva Bible. So I'm going to do it, and I'm sorry for my long absence. The Geneva Bible, those of you who've already joined the readings will know that it's the Founder's Bible. It's the Bible that launched, that predated Shakespeare and Milton. It was made illegal to share it before the authorization of the King James Bible. As beautiful as the King James Bible is, it is kind of a monarchist's Bible. So, and this is also the Puritans' Bible. And as I've, a theme throughout our readings, just to recap, which totally amazed me, and I thought I had read the Bible, in many iterations, is that this God is a very different personality than the gods of virtually all translations, than the God of virtually all translations subsequent, in that this God is super present to humans, shows up in places that he was later written out by later translations, believe it or not, and super forgiving, not distant, not judgmental, not beyond the sky. These are all mistranslations we've dealt with in past chapters. So the other thing is that this text is written in kind of pre-Elizabethan early English. And miraculously, I learned how to read it at Oxford. I never thought I'd use it again. And we also compare these translations to the Hebrew on Chabad.org. And surprisingly, I also learned how to read Hebrew when I was living in Israel as a child. So these two skill sets that I thought I would never use, never need, totally, unhelpful to me in my life, turned out to be incredibly valuable. As chapter by chapter, we see that this is kind of the secret Bible. This is a Bible with a completely different representation, which is much more accurate to the Hebrew of the relationship of God to human beings and to the children of Israel. And it will just blow your mind, as it's blown mine, that literally 500 years of later translations, nearly 500 years, 470 years of later translations, depicted inaccurately a completely different personality for Yahweh. So here we go. Those of you who've been following along, remember that at the end of Genesis, the first book, which we completed, Joseph had brought his brothers who had tried to kill him to Egypt, where he was now a really important kind of second in command to Pharaoh. He had forgiven them for trying to kill him. Remember the famous chapter 50:20, you intended it for evil, but God intended it for good, to bring about, I'm paraphrasing, but to bring about what has happened now, which is the saving of many lives. That's from the story of Joseph. And Joseph was fruitful and multiplied in Egypt. He had descendants. He lived to see his grandchildren sitting on his knee, as we saw in the last chapter. And he forgave his brothers, which is pretty incredible, for literally trying to leave him to be devoured by wild animals in the desert. So the whole story of Joseph is an incredible kind of reiteration. And this is also a theme we're seeing throughout the Hebrew Bible of, you can have your own plans. You can think we'll just, avert the life of Joseph by digging this pit and leaving him here and bringing his coat of many colors or stripes, depending on the translation, to our bereaved dad and saying it looks, and putting blood on it and saying it looks like wild animals got him. But you're not going to, by doing so, avert God's plans if God has other plans. And we're seeing that again and again in these stories. God is determined that the children of Israel will survive. They will be his, and this is really interesting to me as a Jewish woman, but like the whole relationship between God and the children of Israel was taught to me in Hebrew school and Sunday school as like, we're chosen, so we're just automatically his. And that's an ethnic thing. But that's not at all the nature of the covenant between God and the children of Israel here. And this is kind of much more reasonable and less arbitrary to me. In to date, as of Exodus 1, it seems over and over like God is trying to create kind of a test case out of the children of Israel. In other words, trying to create a model relationship with human beings in which he can show kind of humanity what it looks like to walk with God. And he keeps asking the children of Israel to just kind of align with him so that he can accomplish this. And they keep, blowing him off essentially. Or, the joke I made in one of my essays was, if this was a rom-com, the best friend would say to Yahweh, they're just not that into you, move on, like give up on the children of Israel. But Yahweh really doesn't want to do that. He keeps giving them loopholes and giving them a second chance, and, like relenting when Moses or Abraham try to negotiate with him to be gentler in his judgment of these, erring, problematic, disobedient people. He wants it to work out, but he doesn't want to create descendants to exclude everyone else. He wants to create descendants to include everyone else. And that is really interesting to me, because one of the challenges I had with what I learned about Judaism, you'll have to forgive Loki being wanting to be part of this video as well, is that Judaism, I struggled with it being represented as exclusive, but in the Hebrew Bible, it is inclusive. You are supposed to include your servants who may not be Jewish. You are supposed to include the stranger in your land in sharing with them these beautiful rituals and ceremonies and celebrations of different aspects of the relationship with God that God is trying to teach the children of Israel. So here we go. The second book of Moses, called Exodus. And again, this is just to show you what the text looks like. This is the 1560 original edition. Quite difficult to read if you're not, look, he's adorable. Yes, he is. If you're not used to it, but it gets easier as you go along. And you can just follow along with me. Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher, and those are tribes. Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came there with Yaakov, or Jacob, Reuven, Simeon, Levi, and Yehuda, Issachar, Zevulun, and Benjamin. And I'm giving you the tribes' names more in the Hebrew than in the English. Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. So all these souls that came out of the loins of Yaakov, Jacob, were 70 souls. Joseph was in Egypt already. Now Joseph died, and all his brethren, and that whole generation. And that's what happened in the last chapter. And the children of Israel brought forth fruit and increased in abundance and were multiplied. And you hear that echo from Genesis of God saying, be fruitful and multiply. That's what God wants for us. And I stress that in a time of genocide, that's what God wants for us, not crazy, irresponsible misuse of God's providence, but for us to cherish our children, cherish our babies, be fruitful and multiply. And we're multiplied and we're exceeding mighty, so that the land was full of them. Then there rose up a new king in Egypt who knew not Joseph. And the note says he means the country of Goshen. And it also says he considered not how God had preserved Egypt for Joseph's sake, this new king. He didn't understand what Joseph had done for Egypt. And he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are greater and mightier than we. Come, let us work wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that if there be war, they join themselves also unto our enemies and fight against us and get them out of the land. And the note says, into Canaan, and so we shall lose our commodities. Therefore, he was afraid they would make war against Egypt and take the commodities of the Egyptians to Canaan. Therefore did they set taskmasters over them to keep them under with burdens. And they built the cities Pitom and Ramses for the treasures of Pharaoh. But the more they vexed them, meaning angered them or stressed them, the more they multiplied and grew. Therefore they were more grieved against the children of Israel. Wherefore and wherefore in the 17th century means thus, for this reason. Wherefore the Egyptians by cruelty caused the children of Israel to serve. Thus they made them weary of their lives by sore labor in clay and in brick and in all work in the field, with all manner of bondage which they laid upon them most cruelly. Moreover, the king of Egypt commanded the midwives of the Hebrew women, of which one's name was Shifra and the name of the other was Puach, and said, when ye do the office of a midwife, meaning when you serve as a midwife to a laboring woman, to the women of the Hebrews, and see them on their stools, meaning their birthing stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then let her live. And the note says, these seem to have been the chief of the rest, meaning Shifra and Pua were the lead midwives. And it said, or when they are laboring in travail, meaning on their birthing stools, they're travailing, they're laboring to give birth. So he's saying to the midwives, kill the sons of the Hebrews, but if it's a daughter, let her live. Notwithstanding, nonetheless, the midwives feared God and did not, as the king of Egypt commanded them, but preserved alive the male children. Then the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, why have ye done thus, and have preserved alive the men children? And the midwives answered Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the women of Egypt, for they are lively, meaning vigorous, and are delivered yet ere midwife come at them, even before the midwife comes to them. Their disobedience herein was lawful, but their dissembling evil. That's the note, that it was lawful to disobey an ungodly command, but they shouldn't have lied. These are high bars, the note said. God therefore prospered the midwives, and the people multiplied and were very mighty. And because the midwives feared God, therefore he made them houses. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every man-child that is born cast ye into the river, but reserve every maid child, meaning female child, alive. And the note says, that is, God increased the families of the Israelites by their means. And it says, when tyrants cannot prevail, i.e. by craft, they burst forth into open rage. So true. And let's go on to chapter 2, because it's short. Then there went a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the note says this Levi was called Amram, who married Ichabod, and it refers you to an earlier chapter or later chapter. And the woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw that he was fair, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, and fair means like healthy, vigorous, beautiful. And when she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark, like a basket, made of reed, meaning reeds, and daubed it, painted it with slime and with pitch, and laid the child therein, and put it among the bulrushes by the river bank. And the note says, committing him to the providence of God, whom she could not keep from the rage of the tyrant. Meaning the baby. The mom trusted the baby to the providence of God because she couldn't keep the baby from the rage of the tyrant. Now his sister stood afar off to wit, to know what would come of him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash her in the river, and her handmaidens, walked by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the bulrushes, she sent her maid to set it. And she opened it and saw it was a child, and behold, the babe wept. So she had compassion on it and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister unto Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call unto thee a nurse of the Hebrew women to nurse thee this child? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the maid went and called the child's mother. And the note says, man's counsel cannot hinder that which God hath determined shall come to pass. That's sort of what I was saying earlier in the introduction, is a constant theme of the Hebrew Bible. Like, this Pharaoh is trying in every human way to get rid of the babies of the children of Israel. And there's his own daughter finding a baby in the bulrushes and saying, wait a minute, I have compassion on this baby. To whom the Pharaoh's daughter said, take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will reward thee. Then the woman took the child and nursed him. His mom took him home and nursed him. Now the child grew, and she brought him, meaning the mom brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he was as her son, and she called his name Moses, because, said she, I drew him out of the water. And in Hebrew, Moshe is the verb for to draw. Ani mashiti et tinok min hamayim. I drew the child from the water. Moshe. And in those days, when Moses was grown, he went forth unto his brethren, his brothers, and looked on their burdens. Also he saw an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren, that was 40 years old when he was grown. And he looked round about, and when he saw no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Again he came forth the second day, and behold, two Hebrews strove, they were fighting. And he said unto him that did the wrong, wherefore, why smitest thou thy fellow? Why are you smiting your fellow brother? And he answered, who made thee a man of authority and judge over us? Think you to kill me, as you killed the Egyptian, as thou killedst the Egyptian? Then Moses feared and said, certainly this thing is known. And the note says, being assured that God had appointed him to deliver the Israelites. That's why he slew the Egyptian. And then the note here says, though by his fear he showed in his infirmity, yet faith covered it. He was frightened and nervous, but his faith covered it. Now Pharaoh heard this matter and sought to slay Moses. Therefore Moses fled from Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. And the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, which came and drew water and filled the troughs for to water their father's sheep. Then the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses rose up and defended them and watered their sheep. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, how are you come so soon today? And they said, a man of Egypt delivered us, saved us from the hand of the shepherds, and also drew us water enough and watered the sheep. Then he said unto his daughters, and where is he? Why have ye so left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. And Moses agreed to dwell with the man, who gave unto Moses Zipporah, his daughter. And the note says, wherein he declared a thankful mind and would recompense every benefit done unto his. That's the dad, Reuel, being grateful and reciprocating. And she bore a son, whose name he called Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. Then in a process of time, in due time, the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed for the bondage and cried, and their cry for the bondage came up unto God. They were enslaved. And the note says, God humbles his by affliction, that they should cry unto him and receive the fruit of his promise. Then God heard their moan, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them. And the note says, he judged their confessor, acknowledged them to be his. I think that's what it says. He judged their confession and acknowledged them to be his. So we'll stop there. We're now at chapter 3, Exodus 1. And let's take a look at what Chabad says. I just want you to note some echoes. And again, reading the Bible, the 1560 Geneva edition, and the Hebrew version is so amazing, because you see layer upon layer upon layer, pattern upon pattern. It's like an embroidery in which some things repeat. So if we were in a class right now, and I guess we kind of are in a class, I would ask you, what is the theme that you just heard repeat in those 2 chapters? And I'm sure that what you will recognize is a well, and you will recognize, I think it's for the 3rd time now in a pretty short space of just the book of Genesis and the first two chapters of Exodus, a man has come to a well and helped a woman draw water to water the sheep. And then there's a father-in-law who brings in this stranger, this strange man from another tribe into this dynasty, into this family, and he takes a wife. Tzipora, by the way, in modern Hebrew means bird. Tzipor is a bird. I'm not sure if in Hebrew of this era it meant Tzipora, it meant a bird. I'll take a look. But why might this theme recur that, when the man comes to the well and a woman is struggling or the women are struggling to, water their livestock, that he assists them and then he's rewarded with the creation of a family and a new family, even additional family members, a larger tribe. I'm just guessing, but we're introducing, Yahweh is introducing into the world, basically in these stories, if you believe that, this is divinely inspired, which I increasingly do as I read it. I don't think God literally wrote it necessarily, but it feels like God's word or God's creative act, right? But why, why this vision of the ideal of a man? Well, this is these events took place in a really brutal kind of Bedouin type reality. We can't even imagine how brutal it was. Idol worship, sacrifice of babies, temple priestesses, fertility, temple goddesses, fertility goddesses, Malach, you know, like savage idols, and constant warfare and constant war. Like the Ten Commandments don't exist yet, right? There is no ethics. There is no code of ethics in the world. There may be good people, but Malach and Asherah and Baal and other idols don't say things like, don't have sex with your sister, don't uncover your father's nakedness, take in the stranger, feed the widow. That's not happening in the world. That's not, religion like that doesn't exist yet. So what, the ideal man, in that society would be a killer, would be Esau, right? Or a cheater, someone who kills his brother or steals his brother's goods, without any hesitation. So what do we get with these three repetitions of a man? Judaism doesn't exist yet. It's the children of Israel. It's not even 10 tribes, 12 tribes yet formally appointed. It's still very early, but we have a new kind of man, right? We have a new archetype of the ideal man, and that's a man who is a family man, who is blessed with a wife. Like the idea of being blessed with a wife didn't really exist before now. You kind of, grabbed your wife or acquired your wife or enslaved your wife previous to this. And children and women were chattel, just like slaves were chattel. They were all the same kind of category of goods. Before monotheism came into the world, before Judaism came into the world, in effect, right? And you also have him helping women to accomplish their tasks, and nurturing animals, right? So it's not a warrior model; it's a shepherd model, and it's a completely different idea of what a successful man is. So 3 times now, God is showing in these stories of someone showing up at a well and doing the right thing and doing the unselfish thing, that he'll be blessed with children, he'll be blessed with a wife, he'll be blessed with family, and he'll be blessed with riches. And so the new model of a man that's being introduced to the world is generative, right? Not a wimp. Definitely he had to have those warrior qualities when his family or his livestock were threatened, but it's a model of a man who thrives in the world by being aligned with God's will and by helping women, fathering and raising children, and helping animals, grow and thrive and be fruitful as well. It's not the, constant tribal warfare, steal, kill, rape, pillage model of a man that had existed heretofore. So this is new in the world. And I think this is just guessing, but to me, as an English major, I'm not a student of theology, but as an English major, when you have repetition, it underscores a theme. So to me, this is kind of God the poet underscoring, I'm introducing something new. You're not going to get it right away. It's a whole new world that I'm bringing to your attention. It looks like this. If you are good to women, if you father children, if you're good to children, if you're good to animals, you help everyone grow, you'll be blessed with abundance, and you'll be blessed with other people who love you and are connected to you. So that's what I get out of that. So let's now take a look at the comments and also at what Chabad says. Is there any change, anything I'm jumping out in the actual Hebrew translation? Joseph died. The children of Israel were fruitful and swarmed and increased and became very strong, and the land was filled with them. So the language in Hebrew is very, really stresses their abundance. Deal shrewdly with them. The Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with back-breaking labor. Let's see how that reads in Hebrew. V'ye'avdu Mitzrayim, and labored. It's a great verb. Avodah, Eved is a slave, and avodah is work. So ye'avdu means and caused to labor, but it also means and enslaved. It's a word that has two different meanings that are related. Mitzrayim, and that's Egypt. Et bnei Israel, the children of Israel. Befarech, with back-breaking labor. And they embittered their lives with hard labor, with clay and with bricks and with all kind of labor in the fields. All the work that they worked with them, with back-breaking labor. V'yimeraru et chayehem, and they embittered their lives, very literal. And, to this day, we Jews celebrate the memory of what happened here in a way that goes right back to this passage. There's a food that we eat at Passover, which literally, is a remembrance of this event, these sets of events to our people. And it's food called maror, and it's bitters, and it's made of horseradish. And you eat it to remember how the lives of the children of Israel were embittered with backbreaking labor, that we were slaves in Egypt. And so this is all pretty literal. Let's see. The midwives, however, feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them, but they enabled the boys to live. And so let's see how that reads. Vayitarein ha-miyaldot et ha-Elohim. And they feared God. The midwives feared God. Velo asu, and they did not do. Lo means no, asu oseh is to do. Ke'asher, as diber, spoke, elehen, toward them, melech, king Mitzrayim, Egypt, ve'itchayein, and they allowed them to live. Chayim is to live. We still say lechaim, to life, when we toast or cheer or celebrate a wedding or a dinner, even lechaim, or we just have a glass of wine. Et hayeladim, the children. And God benefited the midwives. The people multiplied and became very strong. Let's see how that reads. Ve'yetev Elohim le'miyaldot. Tov is good. So yetev is made good, benefited. That's a good translation. Elohim is God. Le'miyaldot is the midwives. And that's got the word yeled, child, embedded right in it. They are bechilding. That's what the word means. They're not midwives with the woman. They're enabling the child in Hebrew. V'yarev ha'am, and rav means many. Ha'am is the people. V'ye'atzmu me'od, and they etzem is actually etzem is bone. So v'ye'atzmu, it's translated as became very strong and multiplied. And yeah, it took place when the midwives feared God, that he made houses for them. That's so interesting. And this is an interesting difference in translation. Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the Nile, and every daughter you shall allow to live. We didn't quite get that detail with the Geneva Bible. Let's see what it says in Hebrew. Vayetzav, and commanded Pharaoh. Now we have Pharaoh, literally Pharaoh, as opposed to Mitzrayim, which is the euphemism, Egypt. Lechol amo, to all of his people. Lemor, to say, Kol haben, every son, veyilod, hayara, that will be born, hayara tishlechehu, throw him, literally, like, dump him. V'chol habat techayun, and every daughter, again, that root chayim, techayun, you'll allow her to live. That's incredible. So I think it's pretty literally translated. That's the end of the first chapter. And I'm looking at the second chapter we read, and it's quite literally translated. So this is interesting. When Moses was seeing the two men who were quarreling, the two Hebrews, one of them retorted, who made you a man, a prince, and a judge over us? Do you plan to slay me as you have slain the Egyptian? Moses became frightened and said, indeed, the matter has known. So in the Hebrew, the translation directly from the Hebrew, it's more than authority. It's prefiguring Moses' actual role. Vayomer, and said, mi samcha, who put you, lasim is to put, leish sar, as a man who is prince. Sar is literally prince, and we've heard that word before. The shofet, and judge, literally judge, aleinu, over us. Halehargeni ata emor, Omer, ke'asher haragta, and he said, because you have murdered, et hamitzri, the Egyptian, v'yireh Moshe, and Moses was frightened and said, vayomar achen noda, therefore noda, yodea is to know, it is known, hadavar, the thing. And you remember from earlier discussions, that word hadavar is amazing because it means thing and word. And in this case, it means thing. But in Hebrew, a word is also a thing. It's that words are that like concrete and powerful. So that's a really interesting difference in translation because that's exactly what Moses was going to become. As we'll see in a few chapters, he's going to become a prince over the children of Israel. In effect, he's going to become a judge, certainly literally, over the children of Israel. And so the direct translation, the modern translation from the Hebrew, is more literal about the fact that the Hebrew shows a prefiguring than the Geneva Bible, which says, who made you an authority over us? So now let's look at the comments. Hi, Naomi, I hope you're well. I've been praying for you and Mark Stein. After your last reading, I bought myself a Geneva Bible 1560 facsimile edition, says Carolyn R. Carolyn R., you are a wonderful friend and supporter. I think I see you on more than one of my platforms. I'm so glad. And thank you. And I think that's really exciting that you bought it, and I hope you're enjoying it. And you say the Lord's mercy and compassion is apparent from the outset, right? It's so different a text. And you say Loki is adorable, and I agree. Loki, do you want to just join the fun, because you're we've read the Hebrew, we've read the English, and now we can have a puppy. Jordan Allen said, "Lol, your servants, supremacists, monotheism was a huge mistake." Interesting. I don't know what that means exactly. Let's see. So many comments. Yes, Carolyn says she needs a magnifying reading glass to read the margin notes. Me too. I've got to get a magnifying glass because you see that I struggle with how tiny the notes are. And just so people can see what an object this is. And imagine the Puritans reading this. Let me hold it up to you. Those tiny, tiny words there are the margin notes. But just to remind everyone, it was the margin notes that were so revolutionary, as well as the chance for people who had never been able to read the Bible before it was in Latin, or they were illiterate, or there was no printing press. Now they could read the Word of God directly for themselves. So that was revolutionary and changed society and empowered people like the Puritans to think we have a right to build a, a whole society committed to God. We'll cross the ocean, we'll start over. But also the margin notes, which are so down to earth. I think they also help to create this revolution in consciousness, because it's not a priest or a minister standing, or a rabbi, standing between the reader and God. These very matter-of-fact margin notes are kind of creating lessons out of the text that are relevant to every day. And we're in the country, so Loki in the background is running around because he he hears animals, and he's very excited to be back in the country. All right, Kevin Montgomery says, awesome, watching from England, welcome. You handled Parat well, by the way, thank you. Shine the light. Speaking of infants, Jewish tradition of circumcision is cruel and child abuse. That is certainly something we can discuss another time, I think on its own podcast. I think from a modern point of view, circumcision is cruel and child abuse. And a lot of people think that these days. I'd like to share more why it was important when I do a little more research. I know there are reasons it was important in a desert tribal society, but I need to refresh my knowledge of that. Carolyn says, it's so interesting that Satan has been trying to stop the Jewish Messiah being born. And since Yeshua came and went to heaven, he's been trying to stop him returning to fulfill Zechariah. I don't exactly know what that means, but I'm sure we'll hear more. And Jody Keetle-Nemec says, translating the Hebrew words is awesome. Thank you. I feel that too, but I didn't know that anyone else would care. And it's really beautiful that people seem to, people who are not necessarily native Hebrew speakers or acquired Hebrew speakers yet, feel the power of the Hebrew. And Jody says, yes, with back-breaking labor, she's at it again. This is awesome, Naomi. The word of God is more powerful than anything. And Carolyn says, Yeshua HaMashiach is man, prince, and judge. He points to the coming Mashiach, Yeshua Sar Shalom. Interesting. I did not. So to translate that into English, Yeshua is Jesus, also means messenger, like sent by God. And HaMashiach, well, I'm sorry, Yeshua is like to Loshia, is to rescue, to save, savior. HaMashiach, the messenger, is man, prince, and judge. So she's talking about the Jesus that was born in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. But she's saying he points to the coming Mashiach, Yeshua Sar Shalom. Sar Shalom means the Prince of Peace. I know, so this is one of those like interesting points of convergence, but also kind of Venn diagram or division even. Judaism diverged from Christianity, of course, in the 1st century CE, 2nd century CE, after Jesus's death. Obviously, Jesus was Jewish. There was no such thing as Christianity when Jesus was alive. And so Jews in the rabbinic tradition don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. I'm actually, just to share, I'm actually starting to feel like God has such an intimate relationship with people in the Hebrew Bible, and shows up when people are wrestling or they can't sleep, or when a handmaiden is about to die in the desert and her baby is thirsty. I don't see why Yeshua, born in Bethlehem, couldn't be specially sent by God. It seems completely in alignment with all the things God does for humans in these chapters we've read so far. I'm not saying that makes me a Christian. I'm just saying it doesn't seem weird, given the personality of God, that he would try all these things to connect with human beings. Why would he not send a human being, who's his son, in effect, to kind of make it as clear as possible? But I am not familiar with a Christian tradition saying that the forthcoming Messiah, which I know Christians are anticipating is different from Jesus. I thought it was Jesus. So I'll find out more about that from you all, I'm sure. Dale Adamson says, wow, didn't know you were a religious fanatic. Bye. It's not for everyone. Not proselytizing, just sharing. And Killian Denny says, I'm an ancient text junkie. I appreciate your work. Thank you, Killian. Renee Perpetua, impressed by your biblical knowledge. Thank you. Carolyn says, Zechariah says that the Jewish people will call upon the Lord, saying, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed he who comes in the name of God, when he returns and stands upon the Mount of Olives. Well, that I do know. And most Jews can sign on to the fact that in Zechariah and in Isaiah and elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, there is a messianic tradition for sure. We were waiting for the Messiah, and it gets spelled out very clearly in Isaiah and elsewhere. And many parallels with Jesus can be plucked out of the text. I guess not to make Christians mad at me, please, but from when I studied the New Testament with Edwin Meeks at Yale, a very respected Christian biblical scholar, he made the case, and the scholars I read made the case, that Jesus was creating symbolism and how can I put this? Telling stories and making choices to signal that he was the Messiah based on what everyone at that time knew to be those sacred texts. So Christians read Isaiah and Zechariah and say, see, they prefigure Jesus, whereas, some or many biblical scholars look at Jesus's choices and look backwards and say he was a Jew talking to Jews, consciously riding a donkey, for instance, with palm fronds, which, consciously telling stories to invoke that tradition, that messianic tradition. I don't think we can know, and I think that's a divide between, not even between Judaism and Christianity, but between many Christians of faith and even Christian biblical scholars who take a kind of more text-based view, less faith-based view. But I will just leave it there. Gerard Fairley says, watching from Ireland and really enjoying this. Well, that's so wonderful. Cynthia Klippel says, I just celebrated 2 holy days ending in Yom Kippur. So beautiful. I used to be Catholic. Thank you for your time and efforts. She says more, but I will leave it there because I don't want to offend any religion here. But you all can see the comments in the chat. And I think that we've covered it about there. It's time to stop. But I'm so grateful to all of you, and we'll pick up again. I'll try to do it, daily. I can't promise. Days are crazy. We're in the middle of an apocalypse. But the last thing I do want to say before I sign off is what an apt story for our time. It's about people being enslaved. It's about a tyrant coming to power. It's about subjugation, and it's about the murder of babies. And, those of you who follow my work know that I think we're in a time just like that right now. So hopefully reading this together and creating a community will help to save us from the worst, just like it ultimately saved the children of Israel. And with that, Gerard Fairley says, watching good work on your good job on your COVID work too. Carolyn says, thank you from Melbourne, Australia. Where's everybody from? Let's see. Carolyn says, interesting. A Jewish believer doesn't need to become a Christian. The Jewish Messiah came to the Jews first, and the Jewish people recognized him from the timing given by Daniel, his 70th week prophecy. I mean, many of the all the followers of Jesus, except for the Samaritans, were Jews. So that's certainly true initially. Grapevine, Texas, says Jody Nemec. Toronto, Ontario, says Go Ask Alice. So we've got a global community here. Nad Nadira, she is Jewish and was a very liberal Jewish woman, but all of a sudden she's a rabbi. Not a rabbi, just a reader. All right, guys, thank you. I'll end there. Thank you for joining me, and I'll post on Twitter and Getter and on Daily Clout when I'm reading next. Have a beautiful evening, and wherever you are, morning, and I hope that this is encouraging in these difficult times. Take care.